amazing guest with us today, who basically, came from what I'm going to do to look up to me now. I'm here. So we have amazing guests here who's going to support us in all questions we have and going to throw light on what your career or what line you're going to be or whatever questions you have. Let's give it up for the two amazing guests here today. So before we get into this event, I have a couple of house rules we are going to follow. So this is not a mime class, so there's no awkward silences. Be loud with your voice, ask whatever questions you have, and please have your mobile phones in silence, so such that it'll be, yeah, thank you kids. Yeah, let's have our mobile phones in silence, and you have a Q&A session which has been allotted. So please feel free with whatever questions you have. We're thankful that you gave us the questions you already wanted to ask for, but you have an impromptu questions to ask, please feel free to ask. And I'm not going to take much time, so I'll pass on to Meena, who's here to introduce our amazing speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirtana. So just very quickly on how we planned this session today. So we'll start with definitely the introductions, and then we want all of you to open up with any questions that you have. No question is a silly question, so just feel free to ask them and use this opportunity. At around 4, we are going to open the floor for networking, so you can interact with them, as well as there are a lot of other teenagers and professionals, so you can interact with them and voice out your questions, concerns, and learn from each other. So with that, I would first start with introducing Sereena and Curren. And I'm really excited to have them both here, who have achieved a lot academically and professionally, but I think they now want to give back to the community, where they are taking this time out to reach out to young professionals and teenagers and children like you to help you all reach your dreams. So let me first start introducing Sereena Iyer. So she is a truly accomplished individual. She did her schooling from Greenwich, and she was an outstanding student there. She excelled in her math team. She even worked as a local journalist. She has volunteered with GATE. She has supported a local elementary school. And from there, she went on to do her applied mathematics at Yale, where she also got an opportunity to work with the National Economic Council at the White House. So Sereena began her career on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs. I know many times we are all very, we think it's a very risky and very stressful field. So I really am awed by the way you pursued that as your first career. So that's really great to know. And she has since then mentored many young women in STEM, encouraging them to follow their dreams. After graduating from Harvard in 2018, Sereena joined DreamWorks, where she led strategy and operations. She later moved to Netflix, and she now heads the company's studio integration there. So thank you, Sereena, for joining us here today. Our next speaker is Curren Iyer, again, an accomplished professional with a strong background in tech and business. So Curren has done a joint MBA MS engineering program from Harvard. And Curren was a solutions engineer at Adobe and then a product operations manager at LinkedIn. After LinkedIn, he spent a few months as a product manager at Warp, a dev tool startup. Currently, he's a senior product operations manager at Ramp. Outside of work, he is a CEO of Techquitable, a nonprofit helping Black and Latinx college students break into tech through mentorship from software engineers in the industry. So in his spare time, he loves going to concerts, he loves watching tennis, and he wants to travel all the 50 states. So that's what he likes to do. And thank you once again, Curren, for joining us here. And I would now like to ask Kiran, president of our TCSI Youth Committee, to present a small token of appreciation to Sereena and Curren. So with that, Sereena and Curren, I would like to invite each of you to come forward and address the audience. So Sereena, if you would just, yeah.
Hi there. I'm Serena. I think you heard a bit about my background, but I can just walk you through a little bit more. So, like Mina said, I grew up not too far from here, went to high school here. I was super cool, captain of the math team, probably relatable to some of you here. But after I went to high school here, I went to college in Connecticut, which my parents loved because they came to visit me every day they possibly could, including when there were parties on campus. I don't advise that to the teenagers here. Um, so when I was in college, I ended up, really breaking boundaries for Indian kids everywhere and majored in applied math, like you heard. But what I really enjoyed doing was film, so I did a lot of work in film on the side as well. And just kind of like in my spare time, film was one of my passions, but also I was really into, like politics and policy. So as mentioned, I took a semester off. I worked at the White House under Obama for a semester, and worked in the National Economic Council on financial policy. So it was right after the financial crisis. So I spent a bunch of time thinking about Dodd-Frank and all the financial institution reform that came with that, which was really, really interesting to learn about from a government seat. My highlight, though, was that while I was there, I was also able to be one of the Easter bunnies at the White House Easter egg roll. So that's probably my career highlight, and it's just all been downhill from there. I do have pictures to prove it, in case anyone doubts it, which I bring out all the time. But so after doing that, I wanted to find a job that was a little bit more, it had a math side to it, but it also had kind of a social component to it. I like talking to people and meeting people, so that's how I landed on the trading floor. The trading floor was a really exciting place to be. I'm sure if you've seen like The Big Short, or it wasn't quite Wolf of Wall Street. It was more like The Big Short or Pursuit of Happiness, thankfully. But I really loved it there. I had like a lot of good friends. I had really good mentors there. There were very, very few women, which at first was a little bit intimidating, but then kind of became in some ways a positive thing as we got to bring more women in, and also we had a really strong community amongst the women traders who were on the floor. So I was there for a while, and I really loved it. And for a while, I thought that this is great. I found my dream job right out of college. Isn't that lucky? I'm going to stay here. But I realized while I was on the trading floor that I was learning a lot of very specific skills for finance and trading, but I wasn't necessarily learning a lot about management and running a business. And what I eventually wanted to do was learn how to run a business, whether my own or like a bigger company somewhere else. And so I need to learn that skill. I had really good managers who were teaching me, but I was learning more from watching than actually being taught how to do it. So that's what kind of inspired me to think about going to business school. And then I went through the process, applied for graduate school. I got into a couple of them and ended up deciding to go to Harvard because they had a really good international presence, and I wanted to try working internationally a little bit more. When I was at Goldman, I would work in London and other places sometimes, and I liked that experience. So I decided to go to HBS, Harvard Business School, and I was there for 2 years. And the plan was that I would come back and go back into the trading floor. Go learn a bit, come back. But while I was there, I figured, if I have this opportunity to be in school again and learn again, why don't I just try another industry, at least like learn something else, branch out a little bit. So that's kind of when I figured, well, I've always loved film, as I mentioned. I always loved entertainment. I never quite got to try it out before. So why don't I just try it out here? Like, what's the worst that happens? So I ended up, before going to business school, trying to find an internship in entertainment. Obviously, no one was looking at my resume in Hollywood saying, oh, a Goldman Sachs trader, you'd be perfect for Hollywood. So instead, I had to just try to network as much as possible. I basically emailed everyone I possibly could, telling them this is what I wanted to do, and I'm sure most of them rolled their eyes and said, I don't know what you think you'd be doing in Hollywood, but sure, try. Luckily, I eventually found a person who I used to work with when I first started my career, and I'd helped her with a bunch of grunt work, and she'd moved into another seat, and I'd told her, like, hey, I'm trying to figure out a career in film, or at least an internship in film, and it turned out she knew some people who had started this company called A24. It was brand new at the time, but if you're a film nerd, you know that they've made a ton of the movies that recently won a bunch of Oscars over the past few years, like Moonlight and all those other films. So at the time, they were just starting out, and so she made an introduction to them. And then I went and I met the team. They were in this tiny little New York office, and I asked, like, hey, can you get me a job? And they're like, well, we don't have a job for you. So I kept kind of pushing on it, and they said, all right, what if we try inventing an internship? You can be our test intern. And if it goes well with you, maybe we'll start a whole intern program. So that was really exciting. By the way, I've didn't have time to watch all of the A24 movies, so I had my roommate tell me all of her favorite scenes from the movies, and then in the interview, I just kept mentioning those scenes, and like, I hope you don't ask me anything else. Luckily, it worked. So I went there. It was awesome. I spent the month there right before business school. They talked me through kind of, like how the whole process worked. What I love to do whenever I start any like internship or try to learn about an industry is I try to learn how, decisions and money flows through the system. So I asked them to walk me through, when does an idea first start for a film, and then walk me through every single step and how someone decides how to get that made, what happens after it's released, etc. Both from an operational and decision-making perspective, but also from like who's paying who and where does the money go, because eventually that's kind of where it drives any industry. So we did that. It was awesome. I went to business school for a couple years. I did some other internships. I did get to work abroad a couple times, which was awesome. I did some stuff in consulting at McKinsey. I did some stuff at MRC, which is another indie film studio. And then I was coming out of business school and sort of deciding, like, what am I going to do with my career? I could go back to Goldman. I could try this entertainment thing. And what I learned in the process that I actually found the business of entertainment at the time quite boring. A lot of it was just kind of basic, consumer products or, basic finance, stuff like that. It wasn't that exciting. I wanted something that was a little closer to how you made the movies. And so I decided, well, if I'm not going to get that job, I might as well go back to the job that I originally enjoyed doing. So my plan was to move back to New York and go to Goldman. But I happened at the time to be telling everyone again, and this is kind of like a lesson I tell everyone, is just tell everyone what you want. You only get what you ask for. And so I was telling every peer and student and networking person I had in my life, like, I'm trying to find an interesting job in entertainment. And finally, a friend of a friend introduced me to someone at Universal Pictures. And through that person, I met the person who had just stepped in as the COO of DreamWorks Animation. And they told me, well, you should meet him sometime if you're ever in LA. So obviously I made up a reason to be in LA, flew over there overnight, and was like, surprise, I'm here. And so I went to this guy, met him. I stepped on the campus at DreamWorks, which is awesome. It's like a playground for children. There's like statues of Shrek everywhere, which is a crazy thing for a work environment. But I went there. I met this guy. I was, by the way, on my way there, I just kept taking selfies in front of all of the like Shrek posters and the Academy Awards and sending them to my mom, who's like, aren't you on a professional trip right now? So I met the DreamWorks COO. It wasn't supposed to be an interview. He was just supposed to kind of teach me about, how his career path went. And I'd researched a ton about animation and DreamWorks beforehand. And so I just kept talking about my opinions about what DreamWorks should do and what they should think about. And obviously I was like a pipsqueak, so I don't know why he was listening to me. But I found it interesting talking to him. And something else I've learned is that people remember you if you have an opinion, not an insane opinion, like be a little smart with it, but having an opinion makes it more interesting to speak to people. If folks are just kind of asking you questions, a lot of professionals have that conversation over and over again, but it's exciting to engage with someone who has researched the world you work in and who has an opinion on it that they want to debate. So we kept talking about that, and then I, said goodbye. This was nice. Okay, goodbye forever, and I left. Luckily for me, for some reason that stuck out in his mind. 2 months later, he gave me a call. His HR person gave me a call and said, so we've decided to invent a job for you if you want to come, and you can be our strategy and ops person at DreamWorks. And I was like, this is awesome. And then they told me the pay, and I was like, this is an 80% pay cut, so I'm not so sure about that. But it was pretty exciting in general, the concept that I could finally work, in entertainment. And it was something that was really close to the making of the movies. All the artists and animations sit in the same office on the same campus that you sit on as a business person. So I'd go into breakfast and everyone would be sketching. And I was like, this is something I've always wanted to do. It's a place I've always wanted to be in. If I don't try it, I'm always going to wonder what would happen if I had. And so I decided, all right, well, let's, this is something I've always wanted to do. Let's take a risk. Let's do it. So I ended up, instead of going back to New York to the job that I already knew and liked, I flew to LA. I went to this job at DreamWorks. I was there for 3 years. I tried to learn everything I could about the industry. I actually took the new hire art classes that all the new animation artists took. I sat next to them and did all the sketches. No one told them that I wasn't actually a new hire artist, so they were sitting there wondering, like, why is this person so bad? And some of them were nice. They were like, oh, I really like your rabbit. And I was like, well, I was trying to draw an elephant, but that's okay. So I was there for a while. I loved working there. I loved kind of learning everything I could. I tried to shadow everyone. I shadowed assistants. I shadowed senior leaders, producers, the whole thing. And I had a bunch of fun there. At the same time, Netflix happened to be building up their own animation studio. If you remember, they were growing a lot during the pandemic, and one of the things they wanted to do was invest in animation and kids and family because it's big business for entertainment in general. And luckily, there were very few people that were strategy folks who worked in animation, so they had to hire me, is what I told them. So I ended up moving over there. I worked there for a while. And so I've been there for about 3.5, almost 4 years. What I started in was kind of studio strategy, so the strategy on how you like operate and build a business, which I enjoyed because it's not purely about animation. You really think about how to build a business in general, which is something I find really fascinating. In any industry, I love business history. I love like the operations of business. But I also got to still be in entertainment. So I started working on that. We did a lot of different kind of big projects, kind of tooling around how the business was structured. I really love animation technology, especially, so I spent a lot of time thinking about how to build our technology pipeline, which is really unique in this space. And then finally, from there, I moved into a role where we had just acquired a large production company in Australia and Vancouver, and so I started leading the integration of that, which was a really interesting job for me because it balanced both thinking about how to operate a company with a very heavy people component. As you've probably known if you've been through any M&A before, there's a lot that you have to think about with how people feel. It's a very nerve-wracking experience for employees, so I spent a lot of time traveling to Sydney, traveling to Vancouver, and trying to spend time with employees to make it a positive experience for them. And then just recently I stepped into a slightly larger role at the company, so now I cover content strategy for film and TV, so I'm the partner to the creative executives who think about what movies we're making, what TV shows we're making, still in kids and family, which is a space I love. And so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that's my professional story.
Thank you, appreciate it. Hey everyone, thanks for being here. Thanks for braving the weather to come out and hear us speak. And nice job, Sereena. Next time I'll ask to be the first one so I don't have to follow that example. Yeah, great to see you all. A little bit about myself. As Sereena said, we grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. Both went to middle school and high school here. Both were pretty locked in on like math and sciences, like most of you. I think one thing that was a little bit different about me that maybe helped me like longer term was I actually think one subject I really liked was foreign language. So I was always just a really big nerd about like Spanish and then Latin and Greek. And so from an academic standpoint, that kind of changed a little bit atypical from what like a normal like brown South Asian household might have gone and followed. And when I was thinking about that, that kind of like influenced how I thought about like what are the things I want to do next. Okay, well, I really like math, I really like foreign language. What's at the core of both of those? Logic. And so when I was thinking about like when I was in high school, the different extracurriculars I did, there was like math team, chem club, things like that. But then when I was thinking about college, I was like, okay, well, how can I actually put these two together with like math and like Latin? Like one is very like by the books, like formulaic. One is very like a dead language. And so not quite like the most intersection. And so I came into undergrad after when I was applying to different schools. I was lucky to get into Harvard for undergrad under the pretense of studying classics and math. I took my first classics class, didn't really enjoy it. And so I was thinking, okay, what can I do from there? And that was when I discovered computer science. And when you think about like where do you see like logic and an unspoken language, I mean, you have coding. And so that was kind of like the path I stumbled upon, which was computer science and programming. And so I ended up taking computer science as my major for most of undergrad. And that was something I really enjoyed because it was just such an interesting time with technology. Like internet was getting more popular. We had Uber, Airbnb, all these like household names were only just starting up then. And so it was really exciting to sort of like catch that wave as it was going. But then as I was going through undergrad, like it's a great time to explore, which is definitely one lesson I'll recommend for folks who are thinking about college. It was just that I didn't necessarily want to do full-on software engineering. So when I was coming to senior year of college, I was thinking about what's next. And I had an offer to be a software engineer. I was like, okay, this is like the typical path most people do. But then I had this other offer that came through, which was for this new program that a big company, Adobe, had started. They were doing this program for their tech consulting team, also known as solution engineering team. And it was the first time they were hiring new grads. And so this was interesting because it was like a less typical path. Like when people ask me, oh, what's a solution engineer? Even now I'm like, yeah, it's hard to explain. But it was something that was exciting to me because it was an opportunity to take a new bet. And that was something that really was like exciting to me to like be part of a new program, be part to like be in a place where it's like less typical, but it was also something that could be pretty interesting. And it actually ended up being a lot of fun. I did that for about 2.5 years. It got me to go out to the Bay Area. And it was a lot of fun just to be able to like work with Fortune 500 businesses. You think about like banks, hotels, retail companies, and I would be going as this like 22-year-old, and I would be like like, be his designated representative. These like chief marketing officers and boards would step up like whenever I'd enter the room, and I was like, I'm not that fancy, but it was a really cool opportunity to just work with these industries that are like large-scale businesses that are all trying to understand how technology is working. And so I think one of the things I've been really grateful in my career has been that being able to take that not just like knowledge of tech and computer science, but also being able to articulate it and being able to like explain through like teaching classes in undergrad, through doing tutoring, through volunteering. That was something that really helped me as like a ground point in my career. And I think that was something that I've been very grateful to like always continue to have. Um, and then after that, when I was thinking about where I wanted to go next, I think sort of similar to Sereena, we intersect a little bit where I had done a lot of like client-facing work, but then I wanted to get a little more towards the operational side. And so this opportunity at LinkedIn came up. Still, I was in the Bay Area. I remember I interviewed in person. A lot of these big tech companies, they'll try to like sell you with the big perks of like, oh, free meals, like great work-life balance. I was like, okay, this is great. Then 2020 hit, and I got the offer like in February, and then they're like, actually, we're gonna be like remote for a bit. Just stay around SF. Like we'll start, and we'll have you come into the office in no time. Didn't quite pan out that way. So was started the new job remote. But it ended up just being a lot of fun. I think with LinkedIn, what was really special was that it was just a really young culture, and just like a lot of bright young people, lots of new grads, early career people who were just really excited. And I think when a lot of people think about LinkedIn, for instance, they think a lot about just like, okay, it's like a social network. You see all these long posts about like my thought leadership, about B2B sales or something like that. Something like pretty boring. But the core of LinkedIn was actually about this platform to connect people and opportunity. So like you have these like recruiters who are trying to find talent. You have lots of young people who are trying to find jobs. And the goal is to like create this economic graph through the data they had to actually make that something special. And that was like the seed for how I want to think about my career, because it was something I was like very mission oriented. Because I've always liked learning about tech in different industries, but I think to be able to direct it in a way where I could actually see an outcome that was something I really cared about, that was something I really enjoyed. And so that kind of like dictated how I thought about like what I wanted to do after that. So this was like 2021, 2022. COVID was still going on. At the time, I'd also been dedicating a bit of time outside of work to volunteering. I had been helping my sister with a nonprofit called Techquitable, where I was a tech lead, and we basically were raising funds to help restaurants hire back employees and deliver meals to hospital workers. And so that was like a really fun project, kind of like a startup on the side. And then I was also doing some volunteering for some first-generation students, as Mina mentioned earlier, both through just like high school students as well as college. So like high school to college, then college to early career. And that was something I just got a lot of joy out of too. And when I thought about like what I wanted to do next, I knew, okay, I've been lucky to be in these like big tech companies for a while, but I wanted to do a bit more of just like maybe earlier stage, maybe take a little bit more risk. Because like I'd been lucky to be in like these larger companies, but now like as a young person, I still had a lot of opportunity to learn and grow just from doing things myself, and also just seeing a lot of my friends around me do that too. And that's what kind of influenced my decision to think about grad school. And so Harvard had this program called the MSMBA, which is a joint degree, engineering degree, and MBA. And it really just focuses on people who have been in tech for a while, who want to start a company potentially or join something early stage. And that was definitely what I was really excited about, because for me, I'd been in these like tech adjacent roles, but I kind of miss like doing some of that work myself. And so it was an opportunity to sort of reset, learn a lot of the management skills that Sereena mentioned, like how do you actually run a business? What is finance? I don't know. And then also how to actually like think of a company from 0 to 1, which like you hear that phrase a lot with technology. It's like, oh, there's these entrepreneurs like Zuckerberg or Travis Kalanick or all these others. But it was an opportunity to actually just like learn that myself, which is exciting. Um, and I, kind of similar to Serena, used that opportunity to really like explore. I think that was a big thing for both my times at school. Like in undergrad, I explored a lot of like not just computer science, but also like neurobiology, law, statistics, engineering, lots of different fields. I would probably say focused a little more than I did, but it ends up being really fruitful just in terms of having a well-rounded education. And then with the MBA and that grad school, I think it was just about learning about different industries. And so I was able to work at a developer tools startup. It was like 15 people. They just raised from Sequoia Capital. And I was like, hey, I have like nothing to do for the summer. I can like help out for a bit. And the CEO looked at me. He's like, yeah, we can use an extra hand. And it was like, yeah, we can pay you like with our high school, like our college intern. I was like, cool. And so I did that about just basically raising my hand to do whatever needed to get done, just like handling some of our operations, managing some of our finances, helping with our product roadmap, really just trying to like be enthusiastic and raise your hand, just to, like want to ask questions, want to learn. And I think that's something that really helped me, is like especially in the early career, it's like being able to raise your hand, try to do as much as you can, even if it's not in your job description, being able to like ask a lot of questions, show you're curious about what's going on. And then third is probably just show you're fun to work with. I think it helps that even when I mess up, I think the fact that I generally am a pretty smiley person generally gets me through a lot of situations. And so it generally works to my favor. And so it's definitely come in handy for other situations that have been more serious. And then just along with grad school, I explored some other industries too. I was fortunate to work at SpaceX for a summer, luckily through networking, through a friend of Serena's. Um, and that was actually really awesome. Just really got me interested in how startups work and how you think about just like really like growth stage efficiency and just like how to build like a top class team. Really just seeing like kind of how she was talking about like being where the thing is made. Like you're at the office for SpaceX, like even if you're on like a business team, you're literally above the factory where there's like a rocket part moving. And it was pretty awesome to see that. And so that was a cool experience that summer. And so I definitely knew post grad I wanted to do something in the startup world, but I was debating just like what angle it would have been. I think with hard tech, it's a little bit harder with like rockets and stuff because obviously like even though Elon has done a lot with just getting SpaceX like out the door and getting these rockets like flying, I think there is a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty just in terms of like what happens next. And so I think I was leaning a little bit more towards software. Um, and then that's when after graduating, I was thinking a bit about what I wanted to do between like investing in like early stage companies or joining another early stage company. And I ended up finding this company called Ramp. It's a fintech company. They do a lot of corporate card, like business expense management, accounting software. So basically, the mission aspect that really stuck out to me was it really helps small businesses just manage their time and money a lot more effectively. And they just had such strong rapport with all these mom and pop shops that just really spoke really highly about the product. Um, and they also just had a really top class team. And so it was a little bit larger than I originally thought I was going to join, a little more towards like multi-hundred people versus like the 0 to 1 phase I thought I was going to do. But it's been a lot of fun so far. And I've really just learned a lot. And so happy to talk about like the different roles I did as well as just like how I thought about different industries too.
Thank you so much, Serena and Karan. It was really great to hear your journey. I think I had a few takeaways for me, which I thoroughly enjoyed. The point that Serena mentioned, when you join any org, it's very important to understand how decisions and money flows. And I think that's a good takeaway for all professionals here. So that was great. Understood the importance of networking. And I think that's a good point for all of us here, even the students here, where you should try to reach out to everybody that you know to pursue an opportunity. Like you said, you tried out for your first internship. I think that was great for us to know. And even the points that you mentioned, that being ready to take risk, being ready to try out new things, always being enthusiastic. And I really love the point that you said that have a smile on your face and that will always help you get by. So I think that was a great point. So with that, we want to open up the floor for questions. I know that some of you here have already submitted the questions that I have with me, but we would first like to give you all an opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to ask the things that are on top of your mind. You don't have to assess if it looks silly or not. Just be open, and you can learn from great leaders like them. You can probably raise your hand or so, and Kiran here has the mic, so he can get it close to you. Kiran and Suji.
Did you have any regrets or anything that you wish you had done during high school that would have helped you a lot more?
It's a good question. We did a lot, so I wish I slept more, to be honest. I think, one thing that's really important, I don't know if this, can you hear this? Okay. I think one thing that is really important, especially as you enter school and the professional world, like was been mentioned, is networking, but also just building relationships and connections in general. So I think, I'm happy that we spent a lot of time studying. We spent a lot of time on the extracurriculars that we really liked. But I think, building really long-term, we have like friends from high school, of course, but like building long-term friendships and relationships are really a strong backbone for kind of helping you as you grow, both on a friend level, but also as like a thought partner level. I have a lot of really close friends at this point from business school especially, and anytime I'm thinking through a career decision or anything in life, like I have a couple that I just love to call and talk to, and I think that's super valuable, especially when you're like tired from work or you're going through anything in general. So I think what I'd say is in high school, invest in your studies, obviously, invest in something that you care about on an extracurricular level. Find something that you're really passionate about because that really stands out, but also invest in the relationships around you as well, because that's going to stay with you for a really long time. And I wouldn't talk too much about this, but I can go through it later if it's helpful. I went through a bunch of medical up and downs over the past few years as well, and the best thing that I got out of it was the fact that tons of friends from college and grad school and high school and everything kind of came out of the woodwork to be supportive, to come visit, all that stuff, and that is like priceless in life, even compared to school and work. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, kind of similar. I would say like we were obviously very lucky to have a lot of focus academically and really just like try the best we could on our studies. But I think the social aspect in high school is something that I've come to really see the value of like later on. So like when you go to college, you form your roommate group. Like even 8 years out removed from undergrad, like they're still the closest friends I've had, and we still meet up like every like 2 to 3 months, which is something I'm really lucky to have. And so like having that kind of foundation earlier on was probably nice. I realized I didn't mention this too much at the start because I was talking too much about Latin and math, but I did a fair amount of team sports, which was sort of a way to get some friendships there. So I did like high school cross country, track, and fencing, and so that was like a baseline for like having some decent friend group outside of just like the classes. But yeah, I would kind of agree with what Sereena said, just really appreciating the social side. Because I think there's probably a longer discussion when we think about college and whatnot about, okay, what is the ROI of like the incremental like focus on studies versus having that balance in terms of just like longer term career success. But yeah, probably a longer thing.
So, when you guys were in your undergrad, what sort of extracurriculars and like clubs, like paths did you take to find other like ideas and career paths? Because you mentioned like law and other things that you were thinking about doing.
Yeah, I was all over the place, I'll admit. Definitely, in hindsight, I probably would have been a little more focused. But I think some of the clubs were pretty useful. So I did like, originally, because growing up in Greenwich, our parents did finance, she did finance. I was like, okay, I'll do the finance club. I'll try to learn if I like that. I did an internship, did not end up really enjoying it that much. And so that was not really the path for me. But then I did our startup club. And that was where I just felt like I met a lot of people that I really enjoyed, like outside of just the pure computer science academics. It was actually people who also read like the same blogs I did, follow Twitter same as I did, and so that was just like where I sort of found kindred people. And it was also a cool way to bring speakers or like have, and even now like a lot more people are willing to talk to you like over Zoom too. Like you don't necessarily have to fly people to college to come to talk. So it was a really cool way to like build that network, as Serena mentioned, for just like being in a club and having like a platform to do that. But then I also did like fun stuff like Model UN, club, soccer, and some other stuff.
Only a nerd would call Model UN fun stuff. Luckily, I was a nerd too. So I think when you think about extracurriculars, there's two buckets that they fall in, really. One is that's very focused on the subject matter that you're interested in. So like Curren said, if you're interested in startups, joining startup clubs. The other is something that'll give you sort of broader reaching skills or just practice, even if you're not particularly going to follow it. So I kind of fell more into that camp. The big thing that I did when I was in college was mock trial, which is basically you form teams that pretend to be lawyers and witnesses, and you compete against other teams. I was not planning to be a lawyer. At that point, I was burnt out on school, and the 3 years of reading about torts sounded like torture to me. But I really liked the idea of like practicing performing and public speaking and building an argument. And I obviously really like speaking and things like that. So I think it was a great practice to do that. I had a lot of fun. I was often cast as the kind of crazy, kooky witness to throw everyone off. I wasn't sure how I felt about that particularly, but it worked out. I won an award for it, so I feel okay. So that was kind of what I thought about most in my extracurriculars. And then the last thing to think about is just like, what are some groups that you just enjoy meeting and hanging out with the folks in? That's going to make it the most rewarding for you, is if you find a really strong like network or friend group and community in whatever you do.
I forgot to mention one other big club I was involved with was our South Asian club, because I think growing up in Greenwich, it was pretty like homogenous. Like what percentage of Indian people in my school was 1 out of 90, and so the South Asian club was something that was a really cool way to connect with roots outside of family and be part of like our dance team, do some of like our like Indian parties, things like that. So that was also one that was a pretty big part.
Do you have any like regrets in while you're doing your job, and what do you think you could have done now to fix that problem?
A lot of focus on regrets in this room. I hope everyone's okay. But I think so. One of the stories that I often tell is when I was a junior trader at Goldman, and I made a trading error. I mixed up two different kind of orders, basically. It's the equivalent of mixing up buy and sell, but I like to think it wasn't that simple. But in the end, I actually like lost quite a bit of money in the process for my boss who managed our overall portfolio. And I will never forget like this moment, because I remember staring at the screen being like, something's wrong. We can't have lost this much money. And I kept checking and checking, and I was like, oh, we did. Oh, it's my fault. Okay, what am I gonna do? What I will say is that I regret it from it was a mistake perspective, but I think it was also a huge learning thing for me. One, in terms of being careful, but also just in terms of, like, I learned a lot from my boss in that moment and his management style, because I remember like turning to him basically petrified to tell him, hey, I lost a ton of money. I made a mistake. It was just a dumb mistake. I don't know what else to tell you. And he was just very, very calm about the whole thing. He was like, all right, tell me what you did. We'll figure out how to fix it. We'll figure out how to stem the issue. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. And I think that what I learned from that is that there's as you think about, further on in your career being a leader or a manager, people under you are always going to be nervous. People are going to make mistakes. If you heighten that by also adding kind of more fuel to the fire by being angry or upset, it's only going to make things worse, and it's going to make people not trust you or want to bring anything to you. And so later on, I never had something like that again, but anytime there was an issue, I felt totally comfortable bringing it to my manager to say, like, hey, this is a problem, but how do we fix it together? And that was invaluable, and we're still very close, but that was especially invaluable for our relationship going forward. Obviously, the next day, he did tell me, like, hey, I'm disappointed in you. You made me look bad. But we figured out, and so what I learned from that is, how do I build on this issue? And I kind of came up with a process that would ensure that we wouldn't have those slips before, and I brought it to him, and we built it into our overall systems. And so I learned from that in terms of, if you have a mistake, be honest about it, be calm about it, and then figure out how to demonstrate that you've learned and that you're going to make things better in the future. So regretted the moment, but I'm glad I went through the experience.
I think one regret maybe was just like earlier on. I think a lot of people when you're young, you sort of might have a chip on your shoulder, think you can take on the world, and just always being able to remember to like stay humble even when you're early. So like the example I have is um, my first big internship was in finance, as I mentioned, and I most of like the friends who had gotten an internship were like studied for hours in finance, kind of made their whole college experience around it to like get this job, while I'd studied for a couple hours to just like right before the interview and got it. And so I came in with a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and that when you have that kind of mentality, it's very easy to see through it. And so like it definitely showed. And so like at the end of summer, they give all the feedback and say, here's a decision about whether you go back or not. And they were like, no, you're not getting offered to come back. We kind of noticed you had a bit of an ego, and we don't think you'd be like a good fit. And I was like, dang, that's tough. But it was a really good learning experience, net. I think it was just really helpful to just like always be very humble about like where you are, always be like showing that you're willing to learn. There's always room to grow. And I think it also just, even one thing was just because like I was a little bit blindsided at the time. Just always have a good pulse with the people you work with, whether it's peers, people who report to you, or people you report to. Just like all three layers, not just people you report to. Just about like what feedback is, like what's your current like vibe check of how am I doing, like how are we working together? Because I think that's the thing I just have found really useful. Just like always get feedback from the people I work with, and it's just been like something I try to keep on top of.
So I've heard a lot like if you're like doing an MBA, like a master's degree, your undergrad like college doesn't like matter as much. If your master's college is like much more prestigious, like I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a bit on the industry. I think tech, for the most part, they don't even care about grad school, to be honest. And so, like, I think grad school is becoming less important for that going on for me, like going forward. It's like for me, the motivation for doing grad school was having the 2 to 3 years to like explore and like tech and startups and like maybe doing something myself. But like other industries that are more traditional, they still care a bit about it, whether it's like finance, consulting, entertainment maybe. But it's like it's hard to say. I think it really is kind of a case by case basis. Yeah.
I have a question. How did you guys stay motivated, or what kept you like driving if you faced any challenges during your studies or career?
I think for me, well, I think first of all, in some ways it's a bit personal. There's an important thing to figure out as you're, especially in college or even high school, just like what motivates you specifically. And I'm not just throwing the question back to you because it's actually something that I ask anyone who starts working for me in their first few days is, what do you find motivating? Is it working with specific types of people? Is it getting credit for things? Is it a title, money, whatever it is? And once you learn that about yourself, it becomes really like not easy, but it allows you focus and positioning yourself into places that are going to make sure you're motivated. But specifically for me, what motivates me is one, feeling like I'm impacting something, like moving it forward and changing something. I've picked a lot of my jobs specifically around that, being in companies or industries that are at a big inflection point. So going to Goldman right after the financial crisis. The industry was in a big inflection point. We had to figure out how to change how traders operated. I went to DreamWorks right after they were acquired by Universal because I liked the idea of being part of the turnaround team. I went to Netflix when they were trying to build an animation studio because I liked the idea of being part of that. It pairs with a lot of chaos when you're in a job that is trying to change or move something, but I really enjoy that and I thrive off of it. And I found that when I was in roles that were a little bit more stable, even if they were more stable and I had more balance, I got bored very easily. The other thing that really motivates me personally is just kind of like people. I really love going to the office and working with people that I really like. I notoriously love just walking up and down the hallways to say hi to folks and check in with them and see how their kids are doing or whatever it is. And that's my favorite part of any job. And so what I found when I'm looking for jobs is one, find a place where I really like the people, where I'll just be around a lot of people, find something that's in a lot of change. And then, the other thing that I, think about is everyone eventually gets kind of tired or burnt out. There's no way you don't if you're trying to succeed. So just kind of finding those things that remind you of how lucky or exciting whatever you're doing is. So one thing I would do a lot when I was at DreamWorks and I would get kind of tired or burnt out is I would go and I would watch the credits for Shrek. And I would see all the names of people who I worked with now, and I was like, I work with all the people that made Shrek. That's awesome. Like, I'm in such a lucky job, and that would always, like, really reinvigorate me. And so finding kind of whatever that is kind of what I would recommend, is sit and think about what makes you happy and what makes you, like, re-excited day to day, and then try to position yourself around that.
Yeah, pretty similar. I think when you think about a question about like why do I like what motivates me in life, that can be very daunting. And I feel like if I have faced that question even a couple years ago, I feel like I would go down a rabbit hole. So I try to like take it kind of at a more minute level, kind of how Sereena does, like day to day, tactically. What do you find exciting? And so for me, kind of similar. It's like people I really like working with, people I feel like I can learn a lot from, being in an area where I feel like I can learn a lot day to day. So like I didn't talk too much about my role, but like as a product operations manager, you do a lot of flexing across like technical debugging with your engineering team to actually thinking about like marketing and sales, then I'll actually think about like, oh, like what can we actually make this release better? Like how do we actually iterate and improve? And so day to day, there's like always something new to handle, which I find pretty exciting. And it's never just something that it's never ever feels like it's just like a rote job. And so I think that helps me. And then longer term, I mean, I try to keep in touch with like community, either it's through my job or like outside of work, just through volunteer efforts. And then I think just if I think like longer term, I think it's just like just working hard, trying to earn enough money and just like have a good lifestyle. I think that's something that like we were lucky to have growing up. And so and then when I think about just like 10 years from now, I feel like that would be something I would want to also be in a position to have too.
Hi. So it looks like your lives are very busy. What do you do to maintain a good work-life balance and avoid becoming burnt out?
Fair question. I'm excited for Sereena's answer to this one. But I feel like with just having a really good friend group, really good touch with like connection with family, I feel like I can always rely on them on like any given day. I think with my work environment, like startups, probably people have heard like some companies are really demanding. They can work you a lot, but like a lot of companies in reality, beyond just what you hear from like some companies, it's like they'll work you as long as you have like the expectation of just like getting things done. It's not about like FaceTime in an office 12 hours a day. It's more just like, are you going to get this project done by like end of week? And it doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing until then, as long as it gets done. So I'm lucky to like be able to use that to my advantage and try to like work more efficiently versus like time intensive. Otherwise, I think just, yeah, having lots to do outside of work and having lots of like good friends around me, family around me, which is really beneficial.
I'm not usually good at answering questions about work-life balance because I don't have a lot. But I find that like I've picked up some hobbies that allow me to feel like I'm working towards something. So, but just to give a little kind of color around this, I sort of alluded to it before. Over the past few years, I had like or actually kind of since I was growing up, I had a lot of medical issues. I was kind of in and out of a wheelchair growing up and out of crutches. I had a sepsis infection when I was a kid. And so that kind of forced me to sit down a lot and just work a lot. When I was 30, I had another surgery that was a hip replacement. I was supposed to be up and running and the whole thing. And what ended up happening was, for various reasons, my nerves got damaged in the surgery and my leg was paralyzed. So I was stuck at home in bed with my parents, and Karin came home to help and everything for a while, and I couldn't really do anything. Normally, these are the stories where people say that they realize that there's more to life than work, etc. That's not really what happened in my case. In my case, though, what happened was I really started pouring myself into work once I was able to get back. I had to be out of work for quite a long time because I couldn't really like sit up or move or focus on screens or anything for quite a long time. But when I did, when about like a year in, when I was finally able to like work a little bit more, work gave me a real sense of purpose. And so I think for that reason, after feeling like you can't move or do anything on your own for a while, like having something that feels like you're finally adding value and you have a sense of purpose again made a big difference. And that's kind of what made me realize that, like, for me, balance comes in just feeling like I'm getting a sense of purpose out of different things I'm doing. So for that reason, like, a lot of the kind of joy and motivation I get is from work. Because once you realize, once you've been without having a feeling of focus or something that you are achieving or doing, getting it again is very, very meaningful. At the same time, though, the other thing that I've really learned how to do is think about how to bounce back and recover. So for after 3 years, I was still using a cane. I still kind of couldn't walk, and we kind of assumed that that was it. I was going to be walking with a cane and a brace and everything my whole life. A couple of the folks that I worked with actually at Netflix really kept kind of pushing me, be like, well, let's figure out what you can do, something active, just so you can like get some energy out or do something. And so I ended up picking up weightlifting of all things, which is not something that you're normally taught when you're a teenage girl. Normally when you're a teenage girl, you're taught how to like run or play field hockey or whatever it is. So I'd always assumed I could never do sports ever, right? Because my leg never worked. It still doesn't, by the way. But then I picked up this like weightlifting thing, and for me it became like a challenge and another sense of purpose. Like, how do I like increase these numbers? How do I get really, really strong? And something just kind of happened in that experience where some mental shift changed where I was like, I'm able to like be really strong. I can overcome anything. And whatever happened with the trainer, we got everything strong again. So I was able to finally walk on my own, which no one expected, which was awesome. And I'm saying all that to say, like, for me, balance doesn't come necessarily from having more of a kind of casual fun or leaning back or anything, but I've gotten like so much joy out of this experience of being able to like weight lift and like pick up tons, like, finally jump, finally move around, finally run. So that's kind of what's been my driving balance and motivator. And now that's kind of my big hobby is 4 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week. I'll go to the trainer earlier in the morning. I'll like lift some weights. I've learned how to walk. I don't use my cane anymore. I don't actually know where it is, which is probably an issue. But the other thing that's been really fun about that is my whole family and friend group has been like along for the ride. I'm always sending them videos. Everyone at work is really invested with all the stats and everything. And so I think balance comes in different forms. And for me, like having my whole community like riding alongside has just been awesome.
So I'm currently in college. I'm a freshman. So I was wondering, like, when you guys were starting your undergrad, how you found that, like, balance between, like, extracurriculars, your academics, and, like, trying to find a place where you weren't taking on more than you can, like, chew, essentially.
I think it takes back and forth. I think when I first started, I was taking on a lot more necessarily. But ultimately, what I would do is sort of work backwards from what it is you think you want. In the end, if you think about kind of the three parts of what your life is going to have, it's going to have studies, it's going to have extracurriculars, and it's going to have the social side of things. And you have to just figure out what percentage are you applying to each. If let's say you're trying to go to law school, for example, law school requires extremely high grades. It just does. So people who want to go to law school have to put a lot of their time into their studies. Law school doesn't necessarily care as much about extracurriculars. Eventually, you're going to need to have a good kind of social network, and you're going to have to be able to speak and argue and all that stuff. So that would kind of just work backwards from that, and that would tell you, all right, put a lot of effort into my studies, so I have a really high GPA. Put a lot of effort into my social side, and like maybe do an extracurricular or two. On the flip side, I didn't really know what I wanted to do until like the very end, so I couldn't really work backwards from a lot. But I knew that I probably didn't want to go to a really intensive grad school that required a lot of kind of studying and a high GPA and everything. And I'd done so much work studying up until that point, so I wanted to shift more of my efforts towards extracurriculars like mock trial and other things, where I could just meet new people and learn new stuff, basically. I learned about politics, which got me into the White House stuff. I learned about different applications of math. I learned about law. And that's kind of how I thought about spreading my time, and then just making sure I saved some time for the social skills as well. The answer, I would say, is a little different if you're in high school. I think when I think about high school and how you allocate your time, I think about it a little bit as a pyramid. So the base of the pyramid is your studies and your academic work. It just has to be really strong. The other stuff isn't going to matter if the academics aren't really strong. So if that's your base, then you build up from there. Then your second layer is your extracurriculars. Having a couple things that you're really invested in, you're really passionate about, that you really like doing, and that you've demonstrated a long history of being really good at. The colleges can tell, obviously, if you've just thrown in 5 new activities in your junior year. They know that you're probably not super passionate about those or not invested in them. But that's your next layer, is adding a couple of those things. And then the third kind of point of the pyramid is, again, is that passion piece. Just what is the thing that makes you unique, that you're uniquely really excited about? Karan was really excited about Latin and classics, for example. That's the stuff that stands out when you're thinking about college and when you're a high schooler. Is just I have good enough grades that I'm worth considering for this school. I'm interesting and I've done all of these different extracurriculars and I put my time into interesting things. And then I have a really unique passion or point of view that will make me an additive person to the class, that will bring something special to talk about and think about as part of that classroom.
Mic drop. There's a secret sauce. For the original question about time in college, I think Sereena hit most of it. I mean, there's one way that you sort of just like learn by doing is you just take on the clubs that you think sound interesting, and then at one point you probably just reassess after a couple months and see what feels like. I don't know if people still know like Marie Kondo, Spark Joy, but it's like what are the things that you still find like bring joy to like your day to day versus not, and then you just kind of to shed those as you go. But otherwise, if you want to take more of like the formulaic approach, then I think what Sereena outlined makes a lot of sense.
So it was very interactive. I just wanted to make sure that we also have time to open the floor for networking and one-on-one questions. So maybe we can take 2 more questions, and then after that we can open up the floor.
Cool. Hi, I have seen you guys try multiple different things, right? So throughout your school, your college, and maybe even throughout your work career, you've tried many things. There might have been situations where you might have been double guessing yourself, am I doing the right thing? So when were they, and did you reach out to any mentors to kind of shape you guys up?
Yeah, a couple times. I think coming out of undergrad, didn't quite know what I wanted to do. As I mentioned, I took like less traditional, like non-pure engineering job, did something else. I think it was just really, I made a lot of effort in those like 2.5 years, like being in the Bay Area. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this day job at Adobe. Obviously, it's a good brand, like less traditional role-wise, but I'm gonna like meet a lot of people in the Bay Area, either through like friends of friends, networking events, alumni events, whatever. And so I think that was something I tried to like really make the most of outside of work, to just like build that network. It was kind of a similar mentality later on when I was thinking about like, okay, do I want to do grad school? Do I want to do like something else after grad school? I think it was just like a lot of just outreach to people. Sereena's really good at outreach, to be honest. I think she helped me a lot with this, just reaching out to people who I think are interesting, just asking questions, be like, okay, I want to talk to like for 20 minutes about this thing. Most people will say yes. Like their time, like 20 minutes of time is like not that expensive. And I think I was able to do that repeatedly over the course of like, let's say, call it 2021 to 2023. So like right before grad school and then going into grad school. So then when I was thinking about career, it's like when like early 2024 this year, like a lot of those people who I already spoken to were in my corner and giving me really good advice about like, here are some jobs you might be interested in. Here are some like things that we think like we can help you with. So like for instance, I networked a lot with, because I was interested in startups, I networked a lot with VC investors. And I have a lot of really good mentors who are there. Like they're not really in like the role I would do day to day, but they know the people, and that's come really valuable to me. But it even doesn't have to be that formal. Like a lot of also mentors have been just like people who are 2 or 3 years older than me in undergrad, and I think they're still very valuable too.
Yeah, I mean, I think deciding between Goldman and DreamWorks Animation was probably my biggest back and forth. I want you to picture me calling our very Indian parents and saying, okay, so I have this job, it's in New York, it pays well, I've done it, everyone likes me and I like it. Or I could fly across the country, make less money and make cartoons. What do we think about that? So, when I was making that decision, it's one that I leaned on a lot of peers and mentors for, to just kind of call and bounce ideas off of them. Actually, the person I was talking about before when I made that trading error was someone that I talked to a lot about this. And, a couple mentors from Goldman, that guy and another woman, gave me really good advice, which was to, like, when you're making big decisions, you often think about what could go wrong in each of them. So, like, oh my, I'm going to go to DreamWorks, think of all the things that can go wrong. What if it doesn't work out? What am I going to do? And then you think about, like, but what if I go to Goldman, I get stuck, and and what am I going to do there? And they're like, you got to reframe it and think about, like, what could go right in both of those situations, and in great success in both, which is the one you're the most excited about. And then you kind of just got to make a bet on yourself. And then put the infrastructure around you, build the network, build the net skills, learn everything you can to pave that path forward. And so that was really, really valuable advice. In general, I think, advice, especially on big decisions, kind of falls into three buckets. There's kind of objective advice, which is just like, is this a good job or not? Is this a good company or not, based on what you know or don't know? And you can kind of ask anyone that, specific people who've worked at the company. And I've done that before. I've gotten jobs and I've called people at the company that I know, or friends of friends, or I've called folks that have worked from that manager and just said, what are they like? That's a little bit more, it's not purely objective, but it's a little bit more objective. Then there's the advice from people who know you really well, who can say, this is a decision that makes sense to me for what you're passionate about, for what you care about, for what you're good at or bad at, to be honest. I've had people be like, that is a good job, but you would not be very good at it. So that's also just as valuable to get. And then finally, I think there's kind of backwards-looking advice where one thing I did when I was calling a couple folks while making some career decisions was asking people who actually didn't know me but had jobs or career paths that I admired, like, if you were in this position, how would you think about this trade-off? And would you hire a person who chose job A or job B, and why or why not? And that kind of gave me another form of objective advice. And it was also just like a nice way to meet new mentors and advisors. Again, like I mentioned before, I think, there's a way to build mentorships and relationships where you just kind of cold call people and ask to talk to them. But I often find that it's even more valuable if you have something specific to talk to them about. Like, I want to learn X, or can I get your advice on this choice, or whatever it is. So that's kind of how I've been approaching it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today and sharing your thoughts with us. I must say it's an absolutely impressive and inspiring resume from both of you. What would you say, like, as one light bulb or highlight moment in either your academic or your professional career so far?
Well, first of all, you were laughing at all my jokes up there, so I appreciate that. Thank you. It's always nice to have that in the audience. Second of all, I think the big highlight for me, I sort of alluded to this earlier, is just you're only going to get what you ask for. And any job I've gotten, besides the kind of the first one that was just out of college for an application process, was, by telling everyone I could possibly tell, this is something I'm interested in. And none of the jobs I got came from someone who was directly associated with them. It came through a friend of a friend of a friend, or something to that end. Like I mentioned with DreamWorks, it was a friend of a friend in school whose parent worked at a different company who sent me down a path. For Netflix, it was, again, like a friend's, sister's brother-in-law, or something to that end. But what helped with all of those situations wasn't me being like, okay, look through your family tree and tell me who works at this company. It was more just kind of being really vocal about, this is something I really want, or I'm really interested in. Like, I really want to work in an entertainment company. I really want to work in animation, or I really want to work abroad, whatever it is. And just kind of keep saying it. And hopefully you're a good enough person. Hopefully you're clearly excited and genuine about it. People, I think, are fundamentally good people, and they want to help. And when they hear someone's excited about something, it makes them feel good to be like, I can introduce you to someone. I can help out. It's free to do that. And people, I find, really enjoy it. So that's been my big light bulb moment, is if there's something you want to do or pivot to or try, just tell everyone. You never know who's gonna be helpful. And then but that's paired with, of course, with just build relationships, be a nice person, be fun, smile, as Curren said. And once you have those two things together, both of which, again, we can both learn even more and more, I think they can power you a lot further.
Yeah, and taking, maybe the other side of it, just, learning about how, to get things from other people, but also just, learning more about yourself. For me, I think it was just during COVID, doing some of the nonprofit work, just that really helped me focus on just like what are things I actually like. And there was like two parts to it. One was the restaurant one I mentioned. It was just a lot of fun talking to like small business owners and actually like think about, okay, like what is your day-to-day job? Like, okay, I have to like hire these employees. I have to manage their shifts. I have to manage also just like the complexity of like suppliers from like the food and also just like chairs and like all these random things you wouldn't even think about, rent, electricity. That to me was like, okay, like actually learning about like how real businesses work. That was really grounding versus say like software. You just think about like code and it's like everything's kind of in the cloud, whatever the cloud is. And it's just kind of so abstract versus this is like purely like brick and mortar. So that to me was like grounding in terms of like what I wanted to do. And then the second part was just sort of like how I want to spend my time. Because like right now I'm still pretty early in my career, not managing people, but I got a lot of joy in like side projects that involved a lot of mentorship and volunteering. And so I did the two things. One was helping a first-gen high school student get into state college in San Francisco. And the other one was helping college students who were from like non-target schools, like who were from like Black and Latinx backgrounds, apply for tech interviews because they have like no idea about like the tech interview process. And just by like being in a decent university, like I have all this knowledge that for whatever reason is sort of gate kept. But I was able to work with a guy over the course of like 3 months. He was like easily one of like the brightest guys I've ever met. But he just, because of his background and like not having the network, he just didn't have that. But then at the end of it, like we sort of lost touch. A couple months later, I see a LinkedIn update that he gets a job at Palantir, which is a stellar company that's crushing it right now. And I was like, wow, this is like really cool. And so that like mentorship, coaching, ideally like being like a people manager type of thing has like a longer term goal for me.
So I think we just want to take one last question because I know some of the parents had submitted some questions to us. So probably Sharanya, if you could just pull up those questions.
Yeah, so if the kids are not from high ranked school district, does that impact their chances for Ivy League colleges?
To an extent, but not necessarily. Like on the flip side, if you're in a higher ranked district, then everyone's sort of targeting the same one. It's very hard to stand out. And so it's like kind of you build this narrative. Like the college application process, from what I've seen in the black box, is admissions reviewer will look at your paperwork for about like 5 minutes. A couple people will look at it. They'll discuss your profile. And part of it is like, okay, where'd you grow up? What are the grades? Like Sereena mentioned, academics is the baseline if you're trying to aim for like the top schools. But then it's also just about like, what did you do with your time and what are you trying to achieve? It's like kind of like an equation. It's like current today plus college equals what future? And like, what is that equation? Does that make sense? And so thinking about like extracurriculars, thinking about like, if you don't have necessarily, let's say like some people I know, they didn't have like APs or IB credits. And so it's like, okay, like what do you do then? You do like maybe a state school, like college class on the side, or you do like some volunteering program on the side. You try to like just make it the most of it with the resources. And so I think if you have like the drive and like ambition, then I think there are other ways for it to show itself beyond just what's on the brand. But it is definitely hard to like overcome that for sure.
I think if you think about what the I guess as we're calling them higher ranked school districts add, it's sort of a level of familiarity with the colleges and that kind of initial step in the door. But as Curren mentioned, the step has to be followed by the whole thing. So one, having all those other pieces is important, but also what's kind of helpful to think about in terms of, matching that step in the door is that there is a networking aspect to college admissions as well. And meaning like you can go to the events that the schools have here and meet the admissions staff. You can go visit the colleges. You can meet people who are there, things like that. That you can build that familiarity as well. And by doing so, demonstrate your own kind of interest and knowledge about the school or whatever it is. So I think there's a lot of different pieces that go into any admissions. It's like a million, really, if you think about it, plus a whole ton of luck. But I think about it, back into what you think I'm missing with my background or my resume or whatever it is, and how do I find a way to overcome it? And that doesn't just apply to college admissions, by the way. It applies to kind of anything. A really good piece of advice I got from someone when first in my career was look at your resume, look at your background, and think about what someone is going to assume about you just right off the bat, and find a way in the first 5 minutes to disprove it. So for me, they were being very brutally honest. They were like, they're going to look at your resume and they're going to assume you're a boring, nerdy math major who can't hold their own in a social environment or on the trading floor. So in the first 5 minutes, you have to demonstrate how personable you can be and prove them wrong immediately, and then talk about the other stuff. And so, whether it's school district or anything else, when you think about applying to school or applying to jobs or whatever, just kind of come into that framework, be honest with yourself of what you think people are going to think you're missing, and then find a way to demonstrate that they're wrong as soon as possible.
Yeah, and even an example with what she just mentioned, I think college application process there are just so competitive. Like, I don't even know if we would have gone in the same schools we got into, but I think one thing that actually helped me was I went to one of those events. I remember my mom was like, we got to go to this event. And I was like, do I really have to go? We went. We talked to the admissions officer, and it was like a 2-minute conversation, like definitely not memorable. Then after I got in, they like send you a little Christmas card or whatever, and it was a note from her saying, it was great meeting you then. I was really glad you were able to get in. And so a lot of those end up helping. You can never really take it for granted.
First and foremost, a huge thank you for both of you for coming here and sharing your experiences, the journey and the insights that you have given us, from leading roles at Netflix to RAMP and co-founding impactful initiatives and thriving as innovators. It's really a unique and just good way to show our students or aspiring students to hear your stories of resilience, passion, and purpose. A special note of gratitude on behalf of Kausalyanti, TCSI Youth Committee, and all the volunteers here, and the people who showed up. So thank you for your time. Highly appreciate it.
Sorry, just a quick question from parents, I'm assuming. You guys both have very impressive careers path. You both mentioned about networking, mentorship. I'm sure it's all down the line from college. What do you recommend the school kids do, as they enter the college? And another question is, anything that parents can help them, or how did your parents help you guys achieve your goals?
I can take the parents part first. The way we had set up was dad was primary breadwinner, working in finance. Mom was taking time off after I was born, so the second kid. And she was generally around, just handle a lot of day-to-day stuff. She was just like laser focused on every detail about like whether it was school programming, knowing like the classes, knowing just like the college, like events that are happening. She was just like really on top of it. Maybe some people call that Tiger Mom today, I don't know. But it was just like, I think I definitely would not have been as focused if I didn't like have her in the corner, also just like being able to like drive me to things, being able to just like making sure I was on top of things. Because like obviously I was doing the schoolwork myself, and then she was like, don't forget this thing. So I think just having a interest in like figuring out like what your kid wants to do. So like she knew I liked STEM, and she's like, okay, so obviously we'll look at like the Ivy Leagues, the MIT, the whatever. But then I also liked Latin and Greek, and she's like, okay, well, we can also look at like some of the liberal arts schools. And so that was just helpful, just like know like I would go to like a Georgetown event or like another school, which is like not typical for like STEM, but it was just like because I was interested in that, she just like made sure that we like gave it a look.
I think for the parents' part, I agree. I think like very specifically, it's very easy to get all over the place when you're in college or when you're a student, just trying tons of different things, learning tons of different things. So both of our parents provided us a lot of structure and also, a little bit of guidance. I'll use that as a nice word, on making sure that we stayed kind of focused on what we were doing and didn't kind of keep on being all over the place trying different things. So I think that was really important. The focus and the organization was really important, and reminding us to like reminding us where grades mattered, where extracurriculars mattered, where we need to make sure we're applying to internships and networking and all that other stuff. So like having that structure is really important. Having the encouragement was really important as well. I think like both of our parents made sure that we thought that if we worked hard enough, there was nothing we couldn't do, which was a very valuable thing that I only appreciated when I went to college and realized that not everyone had that. And then in terms of like what kids can do in school, I actually think networking can start as early as college, and in fact it should. And it's almost easiest to start in college because I think people get, older professionals get networking requests from other professionals or all the time. It's like, hey, help me with this, or like, I need a job immediately. Can you help me? Those are a little stressful, and you often can't help, and so that's why I think people don't always answer them. But with students, it's exciting to see if a student is interested in something. And it's almost the easiest way in is just say, hey, I'm a student. I don't want anything from you. I just want to learn from you. Can you teach me about X, Y, Z? And I think it can start that early. I would do that a little bit in college. I got better at it in business school. Every kind of break, I would go through the college alumni directory, and I sent an email to whoever I could find in at the time entertainment, and the subject line just said HBS student looking for advice. So it was non-threatening. It wasn't like I want a job. It was just like I want some advice, and then I would craft every single email to be very specific about the person. So it wasn't just the general, hey, teach me about the industry. It'd be like, hey, you work in this job in animation. Can you teach me about the distribution model for that? Or, hey, you work in, YouTube. Can you talk to me about how the ads business is performing or something to that end? And I think, like, if you have that, one, it just builds an early network from the beginning, but two, it just builds practice. You start realizing what parts of your story and questions people respond to and what they don't respond to. I would tell this to Curren all the time, like, watch people when you're talking to them as a student and see when their eyes glaze over. Stop telling that story. If you find a part where they lean in, that is your story going forward in the future. So I think it's good to start practicing that as early as that point in time.
Yeah, and the parents can help on that part too. Like, I mean, it can be a little intimidating if like you sit down with your kid and say like, oh, let's practice interviews. Like, maybe not that approach, but just like take interest in like what they're interested in, what they want to do. So like my dad, for instance, he's outside. He was good about that part. He was really good about just being a sounding board for anything career related, or just like when we were going to high school, he would like take all the names of like different teachers, the ones I like, dislike. He would make sure to like talk to them too. So that's just like small things here and there.
Thank you so much, both of you. And I want to open the floor for networking. And you place so much emphasis on networking. So I think the youth here, the children here, should use this opportunity to get introduced to Sereena and Curren and ask questions which were not probably addressed in the discussion so far. And we also have some light snacks at the back. So feel free to enjoy the snacks and meet and discuss with Sereena and Curren. Thank you so much.